Tonight, it's here. Omicron confirmed in 2 travellers as hotel and home quarantine return. A man opens fire, takes a hostage at the shops. The worst they've seen in 50 years, the town swamped by a wall of water. The new laws putting a name and face to the trolls of social media. Plus the Sydney club, which off-contract storm hooker Brandon Smith dreams of winning a premiership for.
This is 9 News with Peter Overton.
Good evening. We were told it was inevitable and the prediction has been realised. The dangerous new strain of COVID, known as Omicron, is in Sydney. 2 international travellers with the virus are in hotel quarantine, and tonight the race is on to find the other passengers who were allowed to isolate at home.
In the last hour, New South Wales Health confirmed the Omicron variant has reached Australia. 2 passengers on the Qatar Airways flight arrived at 7 p.m. last night from Doha. However, they started their journey from southern Africa, where the variant has originated. Both were asymptomatic and are now in quarantine and special accommodation. Earlier, the Health Minister feared the new variant had landed.
We have to expect that Omicron B11529, the variant of COVID, may well already be here.
Another 12 passengers on the flight were also from southern Africa and are now in hotel quarantine.
This just clearly demonstrates that the pandemic is not over. We need to learn to live alongside the virus and also learn to live alongside the various strains of the virus that will come our way.
A new COVID variant, and at Sydney Airport a new level of concern. Multiple passengers from Southeast Asia in their own hazmat suits, and travellers finding at the last moment that entry rules had changed.
We thought that we would get turned back. We were on the tarmac and they turned us back to get a health official to tell us whether we could land or not.
Every passenger arriving here, even if fully vaccinated, must now spend 3 days in home quarantine.
Since you've been in the air, we've now got to do it 72 hours. We've got to stay
yes, I think I've got to do it again.
Yeah.
I've got a form now that tells me I've got to do another PCR test.
I think the 72-hour isolation of those coming in from overseas is a very sensible and practical measure, and we'll keep a very close eye on it.
Another 29 people from South African countries arrived in Sydney last night on Qatar and Emirates flights. They are now in hotel quarantine for 14 days.
There are limits to what the state and federal government can do. These variants will get into the country. It is inevitable. But what we can do to keep people safe is to get vaccinated.
Foreigners from 9 South African countries are now banned from entering Australia. A waste of time, according to one leading South African epidemiologist.
Unfortunately, it's the wrong thing to do because it doesn't help. A virus like this is going to reach every part of the world, whether we like it or not.
It took the Delta variant just 3 weeks to reach 53 countries. And there is early evidence Omicron is far more transmissible. It's already reached the UK, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Hong Kong and Israel.
It's more transmissible and potentially it can evade some of the vaccines.
The Federal Health Minister believes there is a positive in this latest threat.
We have seen no signs that this is a more dangerous disease in terms of its impact on hospitalisation, serious illness or loss of life.
The new variant isn't spooking the Premier. New South Wales will plough ahead with relaxing the health orders on QR codes and masks on December the 15th, and the rules that have so far restricted the unvaccinated will still be removed. With a new variant in the wings, the Premier says now is the time for people to get a booster shot if they are 6 months on from their second dose. Mark Burrows, 9 News.
All right, I want to go live to Laura Tunstall now at Sydney Airport. Laura, good evening. What do we know about the other passengers who were on last night's Qatar Airways flight?
Well, Pete, they have all now been deemed to be close contacts. However, all 260 of them last night were allowed to leave the airport of their own accord and make their way into home quarantine. New South Wales Health has obviously spent today trying to recontact these passengers. Many of them would have caught taxis home, public transport home. Some are staying with family members. Of course, the worry is if there was any transmission of this new variant on that plane, there could be a risk of it spreading here. New South Wales Health is also urgently tonight trying to contact any other travellers who have arrived from those southern African countries over the last 14 days. They are trying to get in contact with them so that they can carry out further testing. Of course, for those passengers who have arrived from there over the past 2 weeks, they haven't had any restrictions on their movements, Pete.
OK, Laura, thank you. New South Wales is closing in on the 95% double dose vaccination rate. Will that be enough to protect us from this new virus strain? Let's go to Mark Burrows, who's with me in the studio. Mark, have we done enough?
Peter, it really is a great unknown just how effective our vaccines will be against the variant. And that's because this has just been discovered. Both of these passengers with the variant were vaccinated and were asymptomatic. Now, that's a promising sign. The Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, said at this stage there has been no sign so far that Omicron is resistant to vaccines. If there is any evidence it is resistant, expect those entry and quarantine rules and possibly the roadmap to change very quickly. Peter.
Mark, thank you. Borders around the world are slamming shut as a growing number of countries record their first Omicron cases. And South Africa has hit out, claiming it's being unfairly punished for discovering the variant.
Confusion and cancelled flights at Johannesburg's main airport, the world bracing itself for another potentially dangerous new strain.
I have to quarantine in a hotel on my cost for 10 days.
It's unfair, it's unjustified, it's abrupt, and it's not good for tourism for South Africa.
61 passengers testing positive upon landing in the Netherlands from South Africa. They were mid-flight when Dutch health authorities introduced new travel restrictions, now confined to this hotel on the outskirts of Amsterdam, awaiting genetic sequencing. As COVID's latest chapter unfolds, Boris Johnson is hoping to buy time.
We need to slow down the seeding of this variant in our country.
A raft of new precautionary measures rolled out, 4 more countries added to the red list, PCR tests on day 2 for travellers and isolation until a negative result is returned. All contacts of a positive case must now isolate for 10 days, even if they're fully vaccinated. An early leader in mass vaccinations, Israel announcing a stopgap, shutting their borders to all foreigners for at least a fortnight.
The reaction of some of countries in terms of imposing travel bans and such measures are completely against the norms and standards as guided by the World Health Organization.
Our failure to vaccinate the rest of the world is not only causing deaths in Africa and Asia, Latin America and other parts of the world, but is going to come back to haunt us.
The United States yet to have a positive Omicron case, but unlikely to stay that way.
Do you believe that Omicron is already here in the U.S., likely?
You know, I would not be surprised if it is. When you have a virus like this, it almost invariably is ultimately going to go essentially all over.
Officials are hoping this new variant could convince millions of unvaccinated Americans to finally get their COVID jab and that they could see an improvement in a so far sluggish demand for boosters.
If you have not had the booster shot, get the booster shot.
A question mark over vaccine effectiveness will remain for weeks. Pfizer and Moderna claim if needed, they could turn around a jab for a new strain within months.
In some ways, if you look at the straight molecular biology of the mutations, it looks potentially quite a lot scarier even than Delta.
Delta remains the predominant American variant, 99% of all infections, as the daily case average sits at 88,000. New York's governor declaring a state of emergency and cancelling elective surgery as COVID cases rise at a rate not seen since April of last year. In the United States, Alison Petrowski, 9 News.
A masked shooter has today brought panic upon the fishing town of Windang near Wollongong. Dressed in black and armed with 2 guns, the man allegedly opened fire at drivers and pedestrians before taking a shop employee hostage.
Dressed for combat, a masked man on a mission. Sounding off and turning a rifle on passing traffic.
Wait, what the f***?
going on?
Just before 10 in the morning.
Is he real?
Eyewitness footage of a heavily armed man, the likes of which rarely seen on Australian streets.
People were panicking. It was terrifying. Everyone was just running.
Are you honest? I'm scared.
I just panicked and ran with the crowd and jumped the fence and ran straight back to mine.
Picking up a small silver briefcase from the middle of Windang Road, he moves on to the nearby dive and spearfishing store and holds up.
There were 2 employees of the dive shop. One of them got out. The second employee was in there and he was later released to police.
Giving himself up and arrested after a short standoff with police. Local man Simon Fleming tonight in custody. Investigators surround his family home. Sources say Fleming had long been battling demons, that the anti-vaxxer travelled to Sydney yesterday to protest in the city. COVID theories aside, he was a licensed firearm holder and would have been subject to regular checks. The 40-year-old previously only known for traffic matters. The incident shut down the Wollongong fishing town. Fears the man in black could have left explosives in his wake.
We've had the bomb and rescue unit go in there, examine the items and render the whole incident safe.
Anti-masker today masked up. What sparked the brief public rampage, now in the hands of police. Ruth Wynne-Williams, 9 News.
The New South Wales Police Force will send 15 officers to the Solomon Islands following a request from the federal government. The team, made up of members from the riot squad, will help boost the support already being provided by ADF troops. After days of violence in the capital, 3 people are dead and more than 100 have been arrested. The Prime Minister wants to force social media titans to unmask anonymous online trolls and make the companies legally liable for any abuse. He's also pledging to throw Commonwealth dollars behind individual defamation actions in a bid to make the internet safer.
A sports ground and budding athletes were the backdrop for shooting from the hip.
Oh, very good, very good.
And shooting from the lip.
The online world shouldn't be a wild west where bots and bigots and trolls and others can just anonymously harm people and hurt people, harass them and bully them and sledge them.
Scott Morrison wants to force social media giants to set up an Australian-based complaints process.
There needs to be an easy and quick and fast way for people to raise these issues with these platforms and get it taken down.
And to make it clear who is responsible for defamation.
The Morrison government will provide clarity in relation to who is the publisher.
A planned law would make social media companies liable for defamatory statements made on their platforms, allow victims to get comments removed, or demand the troll be identified. If that doesn't happen, a court could order disclosure, and the Commonwealth could intervene in disputes where it sees a public interest.
They need to make it safe, and if they won't, we will make them.
It's easier said than done.
It's a logistical nightmare where you have the Facebooks and Twitters, etc., located in the United States.
Anthony Albanese's thoughts lie closer to home.
If it wants to stop misinformation on social media, it could start with some of its own members.
With 1 week left in the parliamentary sitting year, Scott Morrison will be hoping that his backbench settles down and stops trolling him.
The Prime Minister didn't control the House of Representatives, didn't control the Senate and didn't control the government.
That is the nature of Liberals and Nationals. We don't go around treating people like drones.
But his Christmas will come early when Parliament rises. Chris Ullman, 9 News.
A possible clue in the murder of Sydney man Khalim Saliba has been made public, with police looking for this car. The grey Audi TT was seen travelling in the area of Tallowood Avenue in Cherrybrook before and immediately after the murder in April last year. The 86-year-old was attacked by 2 masked men who forced entry into his home. Hundreds of millions of dollars is being laundered by criminals through poker machines across New South Wales, according to the state's gambling watchdog. The revelations heap pressure on the Perrottet government to back reforms to fight organised crime infiltration of pubs and clubs.
For years, the pokies industry has denied it has an organised crime problem. But now it's been caught on camera. This CCTV vision from an inner-city Sydney pub shows a criminal syndicate at work. Leading financial crime lawyer Andrew Trigard says it's undeniable evidence of dirty money being cleaned.
What we're seeing here is poker machines being used as washing machines. This is money laundering.
The exclusive vision of the criminal exploitation of this pokies venue, obtained by 60 Minutes, The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, highlights an endemic problem, according to the most senior gaming investigator in New South Wales, David Byrne. How big do you suspect the problem actually is?
I would suggest easily in the hundreds of millions, possibly billions.
Byrne warns drug and human traffickers are exploiting pubs and clubs to launder huge sums of cash. He says the problem is getting worse and much more needs to be done to fight it. Are you doing this because the society, the community, the clubs, the pubs need a wake-up call?
Oh, I think based on what we're finding, they need a wake-up call, definitely, yeah.
It's also a wake-up call for the Perrottet government, which has backed searing scrutiny of organised crime in casinos, but not yet pubs and clubs.
I suppose the question should be asked, if it's good for them, then it's probably good for the clubs as well.
Nick McKenzie, 9 News.
And you can see more of Nick McKenzie's investigation on 60 Minutes tonight. Vital supplies have been flown into Gunnedah, west of Tamworth, with residents stuck in the middle of a flood not seen in half a century. There are similar scenes across the state, and the message is the floodwaters are here to stay.
It's been nearly 50 years since Gunnedah has seen water like this. The swollen Namoy River creeping into streets and homes, the town's showground more of a muddied pool.
Hope the tennis courts are okay. It's a pretty busy part of the town normally.
Water levels peaked at 8.61 metres late this morning, the highest since 1974. Jason Wheeler and his children were forced to abandon their home and head for higher ground.
I've got another car, camper van, kids stuff. Memories. My wedding stuff, I get married next year.
With roads cut off, supplies were flown in to isolated properties. For some locals, though, the food found them. SES volunteers carried out 12 flood rescues in the past 24 hours.
How you going, mate? You all right? Yep, okay.
Hay boated out to these cows seeking refuge on the Boston Street Bridge near Boggabri. Just one task, keeping crews moving.
Some of those flood rescues over the whole event have been people driving into floodwaters.
South in Singleton, residents great and small escaped the worst of the wet. This afternoon, 700 locals forced to evacuate low-lying areas overnight were given the all clear. The fast-flowing Hunter River peaked at 12.7 metres, enough to fill the local footy oval, but failing to hit the 13-metre mark first predicted. The water now flowing towards Maitland. Minor flooding is expected around the town tomorrow.
All our dams are full and some are on white alert. That means they're going up to capacity.
Burrendong in the central west sitting at a whopping 146%, today bursting at the seams. Warragamba also putting on its own water show. Downstream in the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley, SES crews are on high alert. The river level has already risen by 2.6 metres here in Freeman's Reach since water started spilling out of the dam. At the moment there is no threat to property, but that could change if more rain is forecast.
Within 24 hours we can go from this level here to plus 2.6 to a 6 or 8 metre flood.
James Wilson, 9 News.
And with more on today's weather. Good evening, Amber.
Good evening to you, Pete. It's been a mostly cloudy day in Sydney with a few sprinkles of rain in some suburbs and moderate to fresh southeasterly winds. Another day of below average temperatures after falling to a low of 16 degrees this morning. The city only reached 21 just after lunch. Our west even cooler, only climbing to 20 degrees, which is a whopping 8 degrees below average. La Nina will continue to deliver cooler weather and showers over the next week, but tomorrow is looking like one of the better days. I'll be back with a full forecast a little later, Pete.
Amber, thank you. First, it was your licence, then your VAC certificate. Tonight, the new thing coming to your digital wallet. A discovery in the search for William Tyrrell. We're at the site next. Fire tears through a quarantine hotel. A mum of two now in custody. A pub worker on a break gets the shock of her life. And forget your Opal card, the Sydney bus routes that will be free this week.